Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, my name is David, and I live in a small house on the edge of a dense forest on the outskirts of the city. Since moving here, I have always had an uneasy feeling, as if this forest is not simply a green space, but also contains something dark and elusive. During the day, it looks like any other forest, with birds chirping, light filtering through the leaves, and the occasional glimpse of a deer. But when night falls, everything changes completely. Darkness covers every treetop, and the wind whistles through the dry branches, creating an eerie sound like hundreds of whispers surrounding me. The people in the area often warn me to be careful, especially when it is dark. They tell many strange stories that have happened here. Some people hear footsteps following them, but when they turn around, there is no one. Some people claim to have heard the familiar voices of their loved ones coming from the woods, calling them by name, but when they ran after them, they only found a cold void. Gradually, this forest became an obsession, a taboo that few people dared to mention many times. At first, I did not believe those stories. I loved the quiet, so I thought those stories were just products of imagination or exaggerated fears. However, one night, while I was reading in my room, I suddenly heard a light knock on the window. At first, I thought it was just a branch being blown by the wind. But then, a voice rang out. That voice made my whole body shiver. It was my mother's voice. My mother called my name, gently, familiarly, like when I was a child. But there was one thing that almost made me faint. My mother was not there. She was working the night shift at the hospital in a town more than 10 kilometers from my house. I shivered, my hand unconsciously tightening round the book, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare go near the window, just sat there, motionless, trying to convince myself that I had misheard. But the voice rang out again, clear and certain, as if she was standing right outside the garden. I closed my eyes, trying to keep myself calm. But the more silent I was, the more I heard the murmuring sound in the wind. It wasn't just my mother's voice, but it seemed like there were other voices, mixed together, vague, as if many people were whispering something in the woods. The feeling at that moment was truly indescribable. I didn't know whether I should open the window to check, or keep quiet to avoid something terrible that might happen. The nightmare only lasted a few minutes, but to me, it felt like hours. When the voice disappeared, I rushed to check every corner. Around the house, of course, there was no one. There was only dense darkness and the sound of the wind howling through the trees. That night, I could barely sleep, my mind repeating the question: if it wasn't my mother, then what was calling my name with that voice? I knew. From that moment, my life would never be peaceful again. I had accidentally stepped into a terrifying mystery that the forest had been hiding for so long. And the worst thing was that I had a premonition that this was just the beginning of the horrors that awaited me. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what would happen when I decided to step into that dark forest. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after the first night I heard that voice, I tried to convince myself that it was all an illusion. Maybe it was because I missed my mother so much, or because the night wind created a sound that made me think wrongly. But no matter how I tried to ignore it, the feeling of unease still lingered. Every time I looked out at the dark forest behind the house, I felt like something was waiting, silently observing my every move. The next day, I tried calling my mother to ask if anything was wrong. She answered in a calm voice, saying that she was busy on duty last night and had not left the hospital. Hearing that, my spine shivered even more. Thinking about the fact that I had heard her voice right outside the window, I trembled but remained silent, not daring to tell her, afraid that she would worry. The second night, when the clock struck 12, I heard the familiar sound again. This time, it was not a knock on the window, but the sound of footsteps rustling on the dry leaves on the porch. I opened the curtain slightly and looked down into the yard. The dim moon cast a weak light on the empty land, and I saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest. A thin figure, long hair falling down, looking exactly like my mother. The figure raised its head, its voice echoing through the night. It was still the familiar, sweet voice, calling my name, softly telling me to come closer. I was stunned. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. But I knew for sure my mother could not appear here at this hour. A horrifying truth flashed through my mind. There was something in the forest imitating my mother's voice, and even trying to imitate her appearance. I stepped back, not daring to breathe heavily. The figure stood still, not moving, as if waiting patiently. Part of me wanted to rush out and question, wanted to prove that it was all an illusion. But another part told me that if I opened the door, I would never be the same again. I closed the curtains tightly, sat still on the floor, my heart pounding, my ears still straining to hear every sound on the porch. About half an hour later, the sound disappeared. When I mustered up the courage to look back through the crack in the door, the yard was empty. There was only a thick fog and the chirping of insects coming from the forest. I tried to sleep, but the image of that figure kept haunting my mind. I knew it wasn't my mother, but something else, scary and evil. During the following days, the strange phenomenon continued. Occasionally, I heard voices calling, sometimes in broad daylight. One time, while sitting in the kitchen, I heard my mother calling me from behind the house in a familiar voice. But when I ran out, the backyard was completely silent. The haunting grew stronger and stronger, causing me to live in a state of extreme tension. I began to research similar stories online, rummaging through forums about short, scary stories and paranormal stories. Many people have shared that they have encountered a ghostly phenomenon commonly known as a mimic, an entity that can imitate the voice or appearance of a loved one to lure victims. I shuddered when I realized that what I experienced matched those stories in a terrifying way. Since learning this truth, I have felt its presence around me more clearly. One night, I heard the sound of a wooden door creaking, as if someone was trying to open it. Other times, I saw a dark shadow flash past the window, so fast that I doubted my own eyes. I tried to reassure myself, but deep down, I knew that once the entity set its eyes on me, it would be difficult for me to escape. A terrifying premonition began to creep into me. I knew it would not stop at calling my name. It wanted more than that, perhaps pulling me out of this safe doorway and into the woods. And when that happened, I was not sure I could return. Stay tuned for the next episode to find out what awaits me as I decide to try and get closer to where that figure usually appears. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. The following days, I lived in extreme tension. Every night, I could clearly feel an invisible gaze watching me from the forest. Sometimes, I heard light footsteps on the dry leaves. Then they disappeared as soon as I looked out. Sometimes, I heard whispers right next to my ear, even though I was alone in the room. I began to have trouble sleeping. My eyes were dark. My mind was tired. But my vigilance always made me more alert than ever. I decided to tell this story to a close friend named Michael, who had a strong belief in spiritual phenomena. He listened attentively to every detail I told him, from the voice impersonating my mother to the strange figure appearing in the deep forest. Michael looked at me, his face serious. He said that I might be being watched by a supernatural entity, one of those species that can imitate humans to deceive their victims. I suddenly remembered the articles about paranormal stories. I had read and realized that all the signs matched up eerily. Michael advised me never to respond or follow that voice, because once I entered the forest, I would become easy prey. He also suggested that I place salt around the house, a folk exorcism method that he believed could create a protective barrier. I was skeptical, but did it anyway. That night, I sprinkled a thin ring of salt around the house, hoping to feel somewhat secure. However, around 3 in the morning, when I tried to sleep, the call rang out again. It was still my mother's voice, sweet and gentle, calling my name. In the dark, I deliberately ignored it, hugging my pillow tightly, my heart pounding. But this time, the sound no longer came from the forest, but came from right behind my bedroom door. I was stunned, my whole body numb, as if every drop of blood had frozen. The door shook slightly, as if someone was standing outside with a hand on it. I held my breath, not daring to move. The voice continued, so clear that I could imagine a familiar face smiling right on the other side of the door. But I knew for sure it wasn't my mother. The entity moved closer, trying to break the last barrier that separated me from it. The moment was endless. I was almost exhausted with fear. Then suddenly, everything went silent. No more knocking, no more calling, just the sound of the wind whistling in the forest. I sat motionless until the first light of morning flooded in. When I opened the door, everything was still intact, no sign of an intruder. But deep down, I knew it was testing my limits, getting closer step by step, bit by bit, erasing the safety line. That day, I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind was filled with questions. Why did it choose me, and what did it really want? I decided to write down the whole thing, detail by detail, like a diary. I hoped that by writing it down, I could find some clues, or at least keep my mind from going crazy. But as I sat down to write, I realized that the events I experienced were exactly like some animated horror stories I had seen, where the victim was slowly led to lose control. The thought sent a chill down my spine. That night, I tried something different. I turned on the lights throughout the house and played loud music to drown out the sounds of the forest. However, at midnight, all the lights in my house flickered and went out. The space was plunged into complete darkness. My heart was pounding, my hand trembling as I fumbled for the desk flashlight. When the weak light came on, I saw a silhouette pass by the window. This time, I couldn't mistake it. The face was exactly like my mother's, but the eyes were dark, empty. Without a look, I backed away in panic, the flashlight falling to the ground, the light flickering. When I looked up again, the window was empty darkness, but I knew it hadn't left. It was just waiting, and next time, I might not be sober enough to resist. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens when I decide to ask Michael to come to my house to confront me with a thing lurking in the woods. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Michael came to my house the next afternoon. As soon as I told him the details of how the voice had approached my bedroom door, he frowned, his face showing his tension. Michael was no longer joking like he usually did when we chatted about ghost stories. He brought a small bag containing salt, candles, and an old book containing exorcism rituals that he had collected from various sources. I had never believed in these rituals, but at this point, I had no choice. Together we sprinkled salt around the house again, this time thicker and more tightly. Michael also placed a few white candles in the corners of the living room, both for illumination and to create a spiritual protective circle, as he had said. As the candlelight flickered on the wall, I felt somewhat reassured, but there was still a lingering worry that this was not enough to stop the entity. As night fell, we sat in the living room, the candlelight reflecting on both of our tense faces. The clock struck 12. The atmosphere became heavy and suffocating. At first, there was only the sound of the wind blowing through the trees. Then, once again, the familiar voice rang out. This time, it was not just calling my name, but also uttering words that sounded like pleading. The voice sounded exactly like my mother's, making my heart ache, as if she really was out there, lost in the dark. Michael put his hand on my shoulder, his eyes determined. He shook his head slightly, signaling that I could not answer. I bit my lip until it bled, trying to suppress the urge to jump up and run outside. The voice continued to ring out, getting closer and closer. I could clearly hear the sound of footsteps on the dry leaves, the rustling sound gradually spreading to the main door. Then suddenly, a knock sounded, slow and steady. The knock echoed through the wood, making every nerve in me tense like a guitar string. Michael whispered a few passages from the notebook, his voice trembling but determined. The candle in front of us suddenly flared up, then flickered as if it was about to go out. I clearly heard a soft laugh coming from outside, but it was no longer my mother's voice. The sound was distorted, creepy, like dozens of voices overlapping each other, creating a strange sound that gave me goosebumps. I trembled, unable to keep my composure. I almost jumped up, but Michael held my hand tightly. He shouted, telling me not to leave the candle circle. At that moment, I saw a figure pass by the window. The figure was still exactly like my mother, but the face was blurry, the eye sockets were dark. The smile was unusually long. It just passed by and disappeared into the darkness, leaving a terrifying silence. That whole night, the entity did not leave immediately. It lingered outside, leaving behind creepy sounds, knocking, footsteps, vague calls. Michael and I sat close together, the candlelight the only thing keeping us from feeling swallowed by the darkness. It was only near dawn when the first rays of sunlight crept through the cracks of the door that all the sounds faded away. No more knocking, no more whispering, just an eerie silence. Michael was tired, but he still looked at me with determination. He said the entity was getting stronger. The fact that it could change its voice and even its appearance proved that it was no ordinary ghost. Perhaps it had haunted the forest for a long time, and now it had chosen me as its target. I was stunned, but a determination flashed in my heart. If I didn't find the truth and a way to stop it, it would continue to torture me until I completely collapsed. The next day, we discussed trying to enter the forest at night, where it often appeared. The thought made me shudder, but I knew I couldn't live in fear forever. I need to know what it really is and why it's imitating my mother's voice. And more importantly, I need to find a way to get rid of this haunting before it's too late. Stay tuned for the next episode to find out what happens as we enter the deep darkness of the forest, where a terrifying secret awaits. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, that afternoon, Michael and I prepared to enter the forest. My heart was pounding, my hands were sweaty, but inside I was urged to face the truth. Michael brought a powerful flashlight, a self-defense knife, and a notebook with old rituals. I only carried a wooden stick, hoping that it could help me feel a little safer. The sky was grey, dark clouds were gathering, signaling an impending rain. As I stepped into the forest, I immediately felt the difference. The space seemed to thicken, the sound of the wind was swallowed, and only the rustling sound of dry leaves under our feet remained. Every step felt like hundreds of invisible eyes were watching me, making my skin crawl. Michael walked while whispering a few sentences in the notebook, hoping to create a layer of protection. I followed him closely, my eyes darting around, afraid that at any moment that figure would appear. We walked deeper. The trees were so dense that they blocked out the light. The flashlight cast a small light, but the thick darkness seemed to always try to swallow it. About half an hour later, we came to an unusual clearing. In the middle was a giant tree, its trunk gnarled, its roots reaching up like giant hands tearing at the ground. The space here was so cold that my breath came out in thin wisps of smoke. In the middle of the tree trunk, there was a dark, deep hole, like a door leading to somewhere else. Suddenly, I heard a voice from inside. This time, it was not just my mother's voice, but many different voices, overlapping, distorted. There was a man's voice, there was a child's voice, all calling my name, long, wailing, making my whole body tremble. Michael tightened his grip on the notebook, began to read louder, his voice trembling but determined. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through, even though the forest was still all around. The flashlight flickered repeatedly, then went out, leaving us in total darkness. From within the tree hole, two bright spots appeared, like eyes staring at me. My heart clenched, my breath caught in my throat. The voices suddenly stopped, replaced by a hoarse laugh. Michael shouted, pulled a handful of salt from his pocket, and threw it straight at the tree hole. Immediately, a piercing scream rang out, not from one person, but like dozens, hundreds of simultaneous screams. The air shook. The ground beneath our feet trembled. I held my head, feeling like my eardrums were about to burst. Then, everything went silent. The flashlight flickered again, illuminating the now empty tree hole. But this silence did not reassure me. On the contrary, it terrified me even more. I knew it was still there, hidden in the darkness, observing our every move. Michael breathed heavily, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at me, his eyes full of worry. He whispered that this thing was stronger than he thought. The rituals and salts could only contain it temporarily, not destroy it. The only thing we could do was find a way to retreat before it got completely dark. I nodded, but my heart was still haunted by the strange, bright eyes that had just looked straight at me. As we turned to leave the clearing, the familiar voice rang out again, this time right behind me. It was still my mother's voice, sweet and gentle, but it echoed in the cold air. I turned around, but saw only dense darkness. My whole body was cold, my steps heavy as if being pulled back. Michael grabbed my hand, pulling me away, his voice resolute. "Don't come back." We hurried out of the forest, each step weighing 1,000 pounds. But I knew the story didn't end there. The entity had revealed itself, and it would not give up. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens when we bring the horror from the woods back to the house. A place that seems safe but is waiting for another nightmare. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after leaving the forest that night, I thought everything would calm down, but the opposite was true. The more I tried to forget, the more clearly I felt its presence around me. Every night, whispers echoed in the wind. My mother's familiar voice kept calling my name, lingering in the eerie silence. I knew the copycat had not given up. It was just waiting for me to weaken again. Michael remained by my side. He believed that as long as we kept our spirits up and continued to prepare, sooner or later we would find a way. He brought more documents, reading avidly through the jagged lines of ancient exorcism rituals. But what scared me the most was that in those pages there was a line mentioning that this entity was never alone. Once it had attached itself to a victim, it would leave a mark on that person's soul, making it difficult for others to interfere. I read it over and over again, my heart pounding, feeling like an invisible curse was being carved into my flesh that night. As we sat in the living room, the candlelight casting flickering shadows on the walls, I heard a soft knock. At first, it was just a few clicks, then it got faster and louder, as if someone was pounding on the wooden door. I held my breath, turned to Michael. He nodded, clutching the notebook, his voice solemn. It came all the way here. The darkness outside became unusually thick, so much so that the flashlight couldn't penetrate it. From there, a voice rang out. It was still my mother's voice, but this time it contained urgency and sobbing. She begged me to open the door, saying that she was lost, that I had to come and save her. My heart felt like it was being squeezed, tears welling up in my eyes. I knew my mother was working the town shift, but the sound was so real that I felt like if I didn't open the door, I was abandoning her in the darkness. Michael shouted, telling me I was being tricked, then began to chant. The voice outside instantly changed. From a plea, it turned into a hoarse, distorted laugh, echoing as if dozens of people were laughing together. I shivered. The candle in front of me flickered and then went out. The room was plunged into total darkness. I quickly turned on the flashlight. In the moment the light swept through, I saw a face pass by the window. It was my own face, but the black eyes were empty, the mouth curled into a long, terrifying smile. I screamed, fell back, and the flashlight fell to the ground. When the light hit the wall, the face had disappeared, leaving only the mocking whistling of the wind. Michael pulled me into the salt circle, his hands shaking but his eyes determined. He whispered, "It's getting stronger, and it won't stop until it gets you out." I choked, not knowing whether to be scared or desperate. The house, which had been the last safe place, could no longer keep it out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my face in the window with a crooked smile. I knew that the copycat wanted to deceive me, not only with its voice, but also erase the boundary between me and itself, making me unable to distinguish myself anymore. And when that happened, I might lose it completely, as the sky was just getting light. Michael announced. We have to go back to the tree. It's the only place where it can end. I was scared, but I knew he was right. If I didn't confront it, it would torment me until I had no more strength to resist. I nodded, my heart trembling, but my eyes flashing with determination. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens when we return to the giant hollow tree, preparing for a new confrontation. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after escaping the forest that night, both Michael and I were exhausted, but I knew that it was not over yet. The feeling of being watched still haunted me even when I got home. I closed every window and door, checking every corner of the house like a haunted person. But no matter how many locks I put on, I still heard faint tapping, sometimes on the wall, sometimes on the door, and sometimes from under the floor. Michael decided to stay with me for a few more days. He said he did not want me to face the entity alone. During the day, we tried to find clues, rummaging through the old town library, asking the elders in the area. Finally, an old woman told us about a forgotten legend. According to her, decades ago, there had been a series of disappearances in that forest. It was believed that an ancient entity lived in the hollow of a giant tree, capable of imitating voices and shapes to lure people. The victim was called by name, led deep into the woods, and never returned. The story matched my own experience in a terrifying way. The old woman also said that the entity grew stronger when it gained the trust or weakness of the person it targeted. I remembered the feeling when I heard my mother's voice, the desire to run and hug her. If I had let my guard down, I might have been dragged away forever. That night, as Michael and I sat in the living room, the dim light shining on the ceiling, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. I could feel my breath rising white smoke, even though the door was closed. Then, the voice spoke, this time clearer than ever. It not only called my name, but spoke with such emotion, as if it were my mother actually begging me to open the door. Michael began to read aloud the passage from the book, but the voice grew louder, overlapping, making the whole room tremble. The light went out, leaving a thick darkness. In that darkness, I saw a blurry figure standing in the corner of the room. The figure of a woman, long hair, but the face was hidden in the darkness. My body froze, unable to move. My eyes could only follow that shadow. Michael shouted, swinging salt at it. The shadow swayed, let out a distorted scream, then disappeared. But the hoarse laughter immediately echoed around the four walls, letting us know that it had not left. It had entered my house, eliminating the last safe distance. That whole night, we did not sleep, just sat waiting for the morning. I clearly felt every moment of the thick darkness surrounding us, every whisper seeping through the wooden walls. I knew this house was no longer a safe haven. That entity had entered my territory, and sooner or later, it would attack more violently. Michael suggested that we prepare for the final step, to confront it directly, not in the house, but right at the base of the giant tree where it lived. He believed that only there would we have a chance of ending it. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but also a glimmer of hope. Because if I kept running, I would be exhausted before I had a chance to survive. We began to plan, preparing more candles, salt, and stronger chants. The image of the strange glowing eyes in the tree hole kept appearing in my mind, so haunting that I could not distinguish what was real and what was an illusion. And I knew that the next confrontation would be the decisive moment. Either I would escape this haunting, or I would disappear like those unfortunate people in the past. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens when we return to the tree in the forest to face the mysterious entity one last time. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. The next day. Michael and I spent the morning preparing to return to the forest. The atmosphere was heavy, making the minutes drag on. Michael grabbed extra candles, a lighter, and a large bag of salt. He also copied a few passages from the old notebook onto paper in case it got damaged or lost. I prepared a new flashlight and a small hunting knife. Although I knew that these items would not be enough to fight the entity, at least they made me feel that I was not completely helpless. As dusk fell, we left the house. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, leaving a purple mist over the forest. I walked with a heavy heart. With each step, the question echoed in my mind: would I survive to return? Michael walked ahead, his shoulders tense, his eyes determined but still worried. We went deeper into the forest, and like before, the air became thick and cold. The further we went, the more strange the noises around us became. Sometimes it was the giggles of children. Sometimes it was a faint whisper right next to my ear. I shivered, but tried not to stop. Michael continued to recite the scriptures, his voice resounding, stronger than usual, as if to drown out the intrusion of darkness. After nearly an hour, we came to the clearing with the giant tree. The night was dark. The flashlight cast a shaky light on the rough trunk. The dark hole in the middle of the tree was still there, like a portal from hell. As soon as we stepped into that clearing, the atmosphere changed dramatically. A cold wind blew by. The candle Michael had just lit immediately flickered and went out. The familiar voice rang out, this time not as gentle as before. It was deep, drawn out, distorted, but still retained the timbre of my mother. The voice called my name, then changed to Michael's, then changed to a child's voice. The sounds overlapped, echoing from the hollow tree, as if 100 souls were speaking at once. I almost collapsed, my ears ringing, my eyes blurred. Michael pulled me to my feet, then sprinkled salt in a circle around the two of us. He began to chant, this time louder and more fiercely than ever. The hollow tree shook. The ground beneath our feet cracked slightly, from which a thick black air emerged, swirling in the air. In the black air, the shape of a creature gradually appeared. It was tall, its body as thin as a skeleton, its hair hanging down, covering most of its face. When I raised my head, I saw deep eye sockets glowing inside like two ghostly blue flames. It opened its mouth, but instead of one voice, dozens of voices mixed together at the same time, calling my name, calling Michael, and laughing loudly. I almost collapsed in fear, but Michael remained steadfast, chanting each word as if shouting into the void. The entity roared, approaching the salt circle. When its foot touched the edge, a flash of light caused it to recoil. I saw the anger on its distorted face. Its eyes flashed more fiercely. Its laughter echoed throughout the forest, shaking every branch as if it were about to break. In that moment, I understood that the salt and the prayers could only keep it out, not drive it away completely. It was still there, circling the circle, trying to break through its protective barrier. I heard the snapping of branches, the howling of wind, and the sound of footsteps running around us. It was not just a lone entity, but the whole forest had become its ally. Michael shouted at me to stay strong, not to respond to any voice, but when my mother's voice rang out, full of pain and longing, my heart was torn apart. I wanted to jump up, to run out of the circle, to save that figure. I trembled, tears welled up, but my last reason still kept me there. I knew that once I stepped out, I would never return. The confrontation lasted for what seemed like an eternity. Then suddenly, the entity stopped. Its bright eyes stared at me, then let out a clear whisper, "I will wait for you tomorrow night." Immediately after that, its figure disappeared. The tree hollow became silent again. Only the cold air covered it. Michael sat down on the ground, sweating like a shower. I also sat down, my body exhausted. We knew clearly this was just the beginning. It had arranged another meeting, and the next time would probably be much more intense. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens as we prepare for the final confrontation with the thing that haunts the forest. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Michael and I barely slept the rest of the next day. My mind was racing with the last whispers the entity had left behind. It had promised me tomorrow night, and I knew it would return, stronger and more dangerous. Michael tried to reassure us that we still had time to prepare, but the worried look in his eyes said it all. We had only one chance, either end it or be consumed by it. Michael sought out an old priest in town, who was said to have been involved in many mysterious exorcisms. Although he was hesitant at first, his face paled as we told him about the fake voice, the hollow tree, and the glowing eyes. He confirmed that what we were dealing with was an ancient entity called the Mimic. It existed by tricking, imitating familiar voices to lure people's souls and energies. Once it has been pulled out of its safe circle, the victim will disappear. Forever, the priest gave Michael a small cross, some holy water, and a more powerful prayer, telling us to use it only when the time was right. He also warned that this entity was not easy to destroy, that it might have been attached to the forest for hundreds of years. If we wanted to escape, we would have to not only be steadfast, but also face it directly where it resided. Hearing those words, I felt a shiver, but also a faint hope. That afternoon, I returned home, sat silently looking towards the forest. Every treetop seemed darker. The darkness seemed thicker than usual. I no longer recognized the peace I had seen here. During the day, now all that remained was the feeling of being trapped in a giant trap. Michael sat next to me, put his hand on my shoulder, reassuring me that we would not retreat. That night, I heard whispers around the house, as if the entity knew I was getting ready. It called my name in my mother's voice, Michael's voice, even my own. I heard myself calling out from the woods, cold and desperate. I was shocked, but Michael pulled me back down, reminding me that it was a trick. I clenched my teeth, telling myself not to move. As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the house changed abruptly. The temperature dropped, the candle swayed as if it was about to go out, and the knocking sounded again. This time it was no longer slow, but urgent, strong, as if it wanted to break the wooden door. Michael and I stood up, weapons in hand. The voice rang out. This time it was my mother's, screaming in despair, begging me to open the door. I closed, my eyes, tears welling up, my heart aching as if cut by a knife. Michael shouted the prayer in his hand, and immediately the knocking stopped. But instead, a series of eerie laughter echoed throughout the house. Darkness seemed to spread from the corners of the walls, swallowing the light. I saw long, winding shadows crawling across the floor, creeping close to my feet. I shivered, but Michael pulled me into the salt circle he had prepared. We stood there, like two desperate people waiting for the ghostly storm to sweep through. The shadowy figure appeared again, this time right inside the living room. It was taller, more obscure, but its eyes still glowed like two blue flames. It stared at me, an unnaturally long smile appearing. I felt my every breath being squeezed, my heart being squeezed by an invisible hand. The overlapping voices rang out, calling my name repeatedly, then pausing to whisper, "Tomorrow, I will take you away." Then it disappeared, leaving the room empty, only the smell of smoke and cold. I fell to my knees, my whole body limp, tears mingling with sweat. Michael helped me up, his eyes blazing. "We have to end it. Tomorrow night, at the tree. It will be the last time." I nodded, filled with fear, but also knowing there was no way back. If I didn't face it, I would lose everything. And perhaps, not only me, but others would also become the next victims of the copycat. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens on that decisive night at the tree, where life and death are separated by a thin line. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. The night finally came. Since the afternoon, the sky had been dark, as if even nature knew what was coming. Michael and I prepared everything: white candles, salt, holy water, and the small cross that the priest had given us. I put on a thick coat, but still felt the cold creeping into my veins. Cold not only from the weather, but also from the fear that was eating away at my mind. Michael was silent all the way to the forest, only occasionally tightening his grip on the notebook in his hand, as if drawing courage from those old words. When darkness fell, we stood before a clearing with a giant tree. The flashlight shone brightly, but its light seemed to be swallowed up as soon as it entered the hollow of the tree. The atmosphere was thick. Every breath came out in white smoke. I felt like this place no longer belonged to the human world. Michael began to sprinkle salt to form a protective circle, and I placed candles around it. The unusually cold wind blew, causing the fire to flicker, but I tried to keep it from going out. We stood in the circle, waiting. Time passed slowly. Each minute felt like hours. Then suddenly, a sound rang out. At first it was just the wind whistling, then it gradually turned into a whisper. The familiar voices returned, this time not just my mother's, but the voices of my deceased family members, those I had loved. They called my name, pleading, begging. I clenched my hands, tears welling up, but I knew it was all a trick of the entity. A laugh echoed throughout the clearing. From the hollow of the tree, a thick, black shadow poured out like smoke, swirling in the air and gradually condensing into shape. The mimic appeared, tall, thin, long hair hanging down, eyes glowing a bright blue. It walked step by step towards us, each step shaking the ground. The overlapping voices rang out, screaming, laughing, and then whispering sentences that drove the listener crazy. Michael raised the cross high, his voice resounding as he recited the prayer. The candle around us flared up brightly, creating a circle of light that separated us. The copycat screamed, rushed forward, but was blocked. It clawed at the space, its long fingers leaving tear marks in the air. I watched the scene, my whole body trembling, but in my heart arose a faint hope that we could succeed. However, it did not give up easily. It began to transform, its body twisting and turning into the shape of my mother, its eyes gentle but empty. It reached out its hand, calling me softly in a loving voice. My heart clenched, my feet almost lifted up to step out. Michael shouted loudly, pulling me back, his voice hoarse. "Don't look at it, that's not your mother." I bit my lip until it bled, trying to pin myself within the circle. The copycat transformed again, this time into myself. Another David. The same face, but with a lingering, twisted smile. It spoke, a voice that was terrifyingly similar to mine, repeating the same desperate whispers. I was stunned, my mind spinning, not knowing what was real and what was unreal. Michael continued to chant, his voice hoarse but powerful, each word tearing through the night. The entity screamed violently, the scream shaking the forest. The treetops shook, leaves falling in a storm. The candles around us swayed violently, some went out. The protective circle gradually weakened. I saw its eyes flash, filled with ferocity, as if it was just waiting for the right moment to break the circle and rush in. In that moment of life and death, I remembered the priest's words. Only by facing the tree, with steadfast faith, would we have a chance. I shouted, gathered all my courage, grabbed the bottle of holy water and threw it straight at the glowing eye socket. A loud roar, shaking the ground. The entire giant tree groaned as if it was about to split. The copycat twitched, its shape constantly, changing between dozens of familiar faces, then gradually disappeared in a stream of black smoke. The darkness swirled, retreating into the hollow of the tree, leaving a cold, empty space. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, my whole body exhausted. Michael also sat down, his face pale but his eyes shining with hope. But when I thought everything was over, a soft whisper rang out from the hollow of the tree, small but clear. "You are not free yet." I raised my head, looked into the deep darkness, my heart clenched again. I understood that we had only weakened it, not really ended it, and what was more terrifying was that it had promised to return. Stay tuned for the next episode to see if Michael and I find a way to permanently seal this ancient entity away. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after that terrifying encounter, Michael and I returned home, exhausted. My body felt drained of energy, but my mind felt even heavier. The copycat's final whispers still echoed in my head, haunting me every second. I could never forget the glowing green eyes in the hollow of the tree, nor could I deny that they had never disappeared. The following days, I lived in constant anxiety. During the day, I tried to act normal, doing small tasks to keep my mind busy. But when night fell, the house became cold again, and I began to hear familiar sounds. Footsteps, soft knocks on the door, and sometimes my mother calling my name, gentle but with a hint of horror. I knew it was recovering, trying to find a way back. Michael stayed patiently by my side, continuing to research the notebook and other documents. One night, he confided that there might be only one way to permanently seal the entity, to sacrifice something tied to the strongest. memory of the victim it had chosen. He believed that I was the key, since it had followed my mother's voice to deceive me. Hearing that, my heart ached. Was I going to have to give up my most cherished memory in exchange for safety? I sat silently in my room, looking at an old photo of me and my mother when I was young. Her gentle eyes, her warm smile, all of it comforted me and pained me at the same time. I knew that if I held on to this memory, the copycat would use it to control me. But if I gave it up, I would lose a part of my soul, the last link to the warmth of my family. That night, I couldn't sleep, struggling between love and survival. The next morning, Michael prepared the final rites. We took the picture, the salt, the candle, and the holy water, and returned to the tree. I was trembling, but my heart was filled with determination. The darkness was thick, as if it knew we were coming. As we entered the clearing, a hoarse laugh echoed everywhere, and then a familiar figure appeared. It was still my mother, with dark eyes, holding out her hand invitingly. I burst into tears, but this time I was not as weak as before. I placed the picture in the salt circle, lit the candle, and recited the prayer with Michael. Immediately, the fire flared up fiercely, illuminating the entire area. The mimic screamed, his body twisted, rushing forward, but was blocked by the circle of light. I threw the picture into the fire, my heart torn apart. In the moment the picture burned, the familiar voice fell silent, replaced by a scream that shook the entire forest. The black shadow gradually disappeared. The glowing blue eyes extinguished, the tree cavity shook and closed as if it had never existed. The silence returned, only the wind blowing through the trees. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face, but this time not from fear, but from loss. I knew that I had sealed it away, but at the same time I had also given up the most cherished memory of my life forever. Michael put his hand on my shoulder, his eyes tired but warm. He said that we had made it, that I had escaped. But deep down, I still heard a void echoing in my heart. I no longer heard the familiar voice, no longer saw the ghostly figure around the house, but at night, every time I looked into the woods, I still felt a pair of eyes watching me. Maybe it had disappeared, or maybe it was just sleeping, waiting for another day. My story did not end in complete peace. It ended with sacrifice, with pain, and with liberation. And sometimes, when I walk through the forest, I still, silently, remind myself that there are mysteries in the dark that should not be touched. Because once you hear a familiar voice echoing from a place that cannot be real, you will know that it is too late to turn back. Stay tuned for the next episode, to discover more creepy secrets hidden behind stories that seem to be just rumors.